Did you know that monopoly was originally created to teach people about the dangers of capitalism? And that during World War II, the British government secretly hid real money and escape maps inside monopoly sets for prisoners of war? Welcome to Midnight Deep Dive, where we turn curiosity into comfort. Tonight, we will journey through everything there is to know about the world's most beloved board game. So get comfortable, and let me tell you the cozy story of how a simple square of cardboard became a family tradition that spans the globe. Once upon a time in America. Close your eyes for a moment, and let me take you back to a time when America was still finding its feet, still dreaming of what it could become. It is the year 1903. Gas lamps flicker against windows, casting warm pools of light onto cobblestone streets. In a modest home, a woman named Elizabeth Magee sits at her writing desk, the soft scratch of her pen the only sound breaking the evening quiet. Elizabeth is no ordinary woman for her time. She's a stenographer, a writer, an actress, a woman with ideas that bubble up like spring water, fresh and sometimes revolutionary. Tonight, she's sketching something curious. A square board with spaces around the edges, each one carefully labeled. She calls it the landlord's game, and she has no idea, none at all, that she's planting seeds for family arguments, midnight negotiations, and kitchen table dramas that will echo through homes for more than a century to come. The lamplight catches her ink as she writes, "Labor upon Mother Earth produces wages." She believes, you see, that games should teach us something about the world we live in. Her game has two sets of rules, one that rewards monopoly building, showing how wealth concentrates in the hands of a few, and another that demonstrates the benefits of sharing prosperity. She wants people to see, to really understand, what happens when land and resources become the property of just a handful of people. But time, as it often does, has other plans. Now let's drift forward, like leaves carried on a gentle autumn breeze, 32 years into the future. It's 1935, and America is wrapped in the gray wool blanket of the Great Depression. Jobs are scarce as hen's teeth, hope feels rationed, and families gather around kitchen tables not just for meals, but for comfort, for connection, for escape from the hardships pressing against their windows. In Philadelphia, in a house that probably smells of coffee and yesterday's bread, a man named Charles Darrow sits at his own kitchen table. But Charles isn't writing letters or paying bills. No, Charles is creating something magical, though he doesn't know it yet. He's hand-drawing property cards with the careful attention of an artist, cutting them with scissors that make that satisfying snip-snip sound that somehow makes even the humblest craft feel important. Charles is drawing from memory and imagination, sketching out the streets of Atlantic City, that jewel of the Jersey Shore where he'd vacationed in happier times. Mediterranean Avenue, Baltic Avenue, Oriental Avenue, each name carries the salt air and summer dreams of a place where people went to forget their troubles, if only for a weekend. He colors the properties by hand, Mediterranean and Baltic in rich purple, like the twilight hour when the day's heat finally breaks. St. Charles Place, States Avenue, and Virginia Avenue in orange, warm as a sunset. The yellows of Atlantic, Ventnor, and Marvin Gardens bright as summer corn. The greens of Pacific, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania like well-tended lawns. The blues of Park Place and Boardwalk, deep as the ocean that kissed Atlantic City's shores. But here's where our story takes its first gentle turn toward mystery. You see, Charles Darrow didn't create monopoly from thin air, though that's the story that would be told for decades. The truth, like so many truths, is more complicated, more beautiful, and more human than the myth. The birth of a board. Elizabeth Magee's landlord's game had been quietly spreading for 30 years. Passed from hand to hand like a family recipe, modified and changed as it traveled. College students played it in their dormitories. Families adapted it in their living rooms, and somewhere along the way, it found its way to Charles Darrow's kitchen table. What Charles did, and this is important, was polish it to a shine. He saw the magic in this simple square of possibilities and understood, perhaps instinctively, what would make people fall in love with it. He gave it a name that rolled off the tongue like a promise: Monopoly. He refined the rules, standardized the money, and most importantly, he took it to Parker Brothers. Now, Parker Brothers wasn't just any game company. Founded in 1883 by George Parker, who was barely 16 when he started selling his first game, they had become America's premier game publisher. Their offices in Salem, Massachusetts, probably smelled of wood shavings and ink, filled with the quiet industry of people whose job it was to manufacture fun. When Charles Darrow first approached them in 1934, carrying his handmade game boards like precious cargo, the executives took one look and shook their heads. Too complicated, they said, too long to play. 52 fundamental errors in game design, they counted. People would never have the patience for it. How wonderfully wrong they were. Charles didn't give up. He believed in his game with the quiet persistence of someone who knows they're holding something special. He had 5,000 copies manufactured himself, selling them in Philadelphia department stores during the 1934 Christmas season. And something magical happened. They flew off the shelves like they had wings. Picture those first customers, carrying their games home through the cold December air, not knowing they were about to become part of something that would outlast almost everything else from their era. The games were simpler then. The board was made of sturdy cardboard, the money printed in black and white, the houses and hotels carved from wood with a satisfying heft that made building your empire feel real. By 1935, Parker Brothers was begging Charles Darrow to let them publish his game. They recognized that lightning-in-a-bottle quality that no amount of market research can predict. The first Parker Brothers edition rolled off the presses, and America fell in love. But let's pause here in our story for a gentle detour, because one of the most beautiful chapters of Monopoly's history happened in the shadows of World War II, when the game became an unlikely hero in the fight against fascism. The secret mission. Imagine, if you will, a dimly lit office somewhere in the heart of London during the dark days of 1941. The city outside shudders under the threat of air raids, but inside, British intelligence officers are hunched over desks, working on something that seems almost absurdly domestic: Monopoly games. But these aren't ordinary games. Oh no. These are masterpieces of covert engineering. Hidden inside the innocent-looking game boards are silk maps so fine and detailed they could be folded to the size of a postage stamp. Tucked beneath the paper money are genuine German, Italian, and French currency. And hidden in the game pieces themselves are tiny compasses and files. The plan was ingenious in its simplicity. The International Red Cross, following the Geneva Convention, was allowed to send care packages to prisoners of war. What could be more innocent than including board games to help pass the long, dreary hours in captivity? The special Monopoly sets were mixed in with genuine games, marked only with a tiny red dot that escapees would recognize as their signal. Picture a British airman shot down over occupied France, sitting in a cold barracks somewhere in Germany. The Red Cross package arrives, and among the books and chocolate is a familiar orange and red box. He opens it, perhaps thinking of home, of family game nights, of simpler times. But as he runs his fingers along the board, he feels something unusual: a slight thickness, a subtle ridge. Working carefully, probably by candlelight when the guards weren't watching, he peels back the paper to reveal a silk map showing the safest routes to neutral Switzerland. These games helped dozens of Allied prisoners escape, though the exact number remains classified even today. Each game was a small miracle of hope hidden in plain sight, proof that sometimes the most powerful weapons are the ones nobody suspects. A stroll around our neighborhood. Now, let's take a leisurely walk around the Monopoly board, shall we? Not the hurried march of someone trying to win, but the thoughtful stroll of someone who wants to understand the neighborhood they're visiting. We begin, as all journeys do, at Geo. There's something deeply satisfying about that corner, isn't there? It's home base, the place we return to again and again, reliable as sunrise. Every time we pass Geo, we collect our $200, not a fortune by any means, but enough to keep hope alive, enough to suggest that just by participating, just by showing up, we're rewarded. It's a gentle capitalism, this passing Geo, a reminder that even in a game about accumulating wealth, there's a basic universal income built right in. From Geo, we venture into the purple properties, Mediterranean and Baltic avenues. These are the humble beginnings, the gentle slopes where property ownership starts. Charles Darrow chose these names from the real streets of Atlantic City, where Mediterranean Avenue was indeed one of the more modest addresses. If you were to walk down the real Mediterranean Avenue in the 1930s, you'd find boarding houses where working-class families spent their summer vacations, simple pleasures within reach of ordinary budgets. Baltic Avenue, its purple companion, takes its name from the Baltic Hotel, which in Atlantic City's heyday was a respectable but unpretentious establishment. When you own Mediterranean and Baltic in the game, you're not exactly living large, the rent is modest, the income steady but small. They're the training wheels of property ownership, teaching us the gentle mathematics of cash flow without breaking the bank. Then we come to our first railroad, the Reading Railroad. Now here's where Charles Darrow's genius for naming truly shines. The Reading, pronounced Reading, like the past tense of read, was a real railroad company that had been serving Philadelphia and its surroundings since 1833. It carried coal from the Pennsylvania mountains, connected small towns to big cities, and brought families to Atlantic City for their summer holidays. The railroads in Monopoly hold a special place in the game's ecosystem. They're steady earners, reliable as clockwork, and they become more valuable the more you own. One railroad earns you $25 when someone lands on it, but own all four, and each one pays $200, a lesson in the power of infrastructure and the magic of network effects. Our stroll continues into the light blue properties, Oriental, Vermont, and Connecticut avenues. Oriental Avenue in Atlantic City was where you'd find the more affordable family hotels, places with names like the Colonial or Sea View House, where the rooms were clean and comfortable without being fancy. Vermont Avenue was similarly welcoming to families of modest means, while Connecticut Avenue began to hint at slightly more upscale accommodations. In our game, these properties occupy that sweet spot of early affordability. They're cheap enough to buy when you're still building your portfolio, but they can generate decent rent if you manage to collect all three and add some houses. They're the middle class of Monopoly real estate, respectable, steady, and often overlooked in favor of flashier investments. Then we round the corner to what many consider the most dangerous spot on the board, jail. But let's not think of it as punishment. In the gentle world of our bedtime story, jail is simply a timeout, a moment to pause and reflect. Just visiting the space reminds us, sometimes we all need a break from the hustle and bustle of property acquisition. Sometimes the best strategy is to sit still for a while, collect rent from our existing properties, and watch the world go by. From jail, we venture into the orange properties, St. James Place, Tennessee Avenue, and New York Avenue. These three properties hold a special distinction in Monopoly lore. They're landed on more frequently than almost any others. Why? It's all about the mathematics of movement. Roll 2 dice, and the most common result is 7. 7 spaces from jail brings you right to St. James Place. Add in the various chance and community chest cards that move players around, and the orange properties become the crossroads of the board. In real Atlantic City, St. James Place was a pleasant residential street, while Tennessee Avenue was home to some of the city's African-American hotels and businesses during the era of segregation. A reminder that the real world behind our game was more complex than the simple property transactions on the board. The red properties, Kentucky, Indiana, and Illinois avenues, represent the next step up the property ladder. Kentucky Avenue in Atlantic City was known for its elegant hotels, while Illinois Avenue boasted some of the finest establishments outside of the boardwalk itself. These properties in our game are substantial investments that can generate serious rent, especially when developed with houses and hotels. But let's pause at the third corner: free parking. Free parking, the most misunderstood space on the board, and yet perhaps the most beloved. The official rules state clearly that nothing happens when you land on free parking. It's simply a rest stop, a moment to catch your breath. But families around the world have transformed it into something magical. The jackpot space, where all the tax money and fees accumulate until some lucky player lands there and scoops up the windfall. This transformation of free parking from nothing special into a treasure chest tells us something beautiful about human nature. We want our games to have moments of unexpected joy, sudden reversals of fortune that keep hope alive even when things look bleak. The free parking jackpot isn't in the rule book, but it's written in the hearts of families everywhere. The yellow properties, Atlantic, Ventnor, and Marvin Gardens, bring us into the realm of serious real estate. Atlantic Avenue was one of the main thoroughfares of Atlantic City, lined with shops and restaurants that served the constant stream of visitors. Ventnor was actually a neighboring city, a quieter residential area where many Atlantic City workers lived. And Marvin Gardens, well, here's a delightful secret: there is no Marvin Gardens in Atlantic City. Charles Darrow made a small but charming error, taking the name from the nearby Marvin Gardens in Margate, New Jersey. This little mistake has become part of Monopoly folklore. Marvin Gardens exists only on our board, a place that millions of people know intimately despite it being a product of a simple slip of the pen. It's become more famous than many real places, a testament to the power of games to create their own geography. The green properties, Pacific, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania avenues represent substantial investments in our Monopoly world. The real Pennsylvania Avenue in Atlantic City was indeed an upscale area, while Pacific Avenue ran parallel to the famous boardwalk. These properties command high rents and require significant investment, but they can provide the steady income stream that separates serious property moguls from casual investors. And finally, we arrive at the crown jewels of our board: Park Place and Boardwalk. Those dark blue titans that have inspired more family negotiations than perhaps any other squares in gaming history. Park Place in Atlantic City was exactly what its name suggested: an elegant street lined with upscale hotels and fine restaurants, a place where well-heeled visitors could enjoy the seaside atmosphere without roughing it. But Boardwalk was something else entirely. The Atlantic City Boardwalk, built in 1870, was the world's first boardwalk, a revolutionary idea that allowed people to enjoy the beach without getting sand in their shoes or homes. By the 1930s, when Charles Darrow was designing his game, the boardwalk was 4 miles of pure American entertainment: grand hotels, elaborate amusement piers, rolling chairs pushed by uniformed attendants, and the constant carnival atmosphere of a place dedicated entirely to pleasure. Steel Pier stretched out into the Atlantic, featuring diving horses and big band orchestras. The Tremor Hotel rose 11 stories above the beach, its architecture a fantasy of domes and towers. Lucy the Elephant, a 6-story building shaped like its namesake, offered visitors the chance to climb inside and look out through her eyes. This was the world that Boardwalk represented, the pinnacle of American leisure, the place where dreams of luxury became reality, at least for a week or two each summer. It's no wonder that in our game, Boardwalk commands the highest rent, requires the greatest investment, and occupies the most coveted spot on the board. the characters we became. But what would our journey around this neighborhood be without meeting its residents? I speak, of course, of those little metal tokens that have hopped, rolled, and marched around countless boards, carrying our hopes and dreams from property to property. Let's begin with the most distinguished resident of our board, that dapper gentleman we've come to know as Rich Uncle Pennybags, though he was originally just called the Monopoly Man. Picture him for a moment, round and jolly, sporting a mustache that speaks of prosperity and confidence, dressed in a morning coat and top hat that suggest both wealth and whimsy. Now here's something that might surprise you. Rich Uncle Pennybags has never, not once, worn a monocle. And yet, if I asked you to describe him right now, I'd wager that many of you would include that little circular eyepiece as one of his defining features. It's one of the most fascinating examples of collective false memory in popular culture. Somewhere in our minds, we've mixed him up with another symbol of wealth. Perhaps the Planters Peanuts mascot, Mr. Peanut, who does indeed sport a monocle, and created a version of Uncle Pennybags that exists more vividly in our memories than the real thing. This little quirk of memory tells us something beautiful about how games become part of our personal mythology. We don't just play Monopoly, we remember it, we dream about it, and sometimes our dreams become more real than reality itself. But Uncle Pennybags, monocle or no monocle, was never meant to be a player in the game. That honor belongs to the tokens, those small metal ambassadors of our ambitions that have been racing around the board since the game's earliest days. The original Monopoly set included 8 tokens, each one carefully chosen to represent different aspects of 1930s American life. There was the top hat, symbol of wealth and status, the kind of hat worn by businessmen and bankers who understood the value of appearance. The iron, humble and practical, represented the domestic sphere, the careful management of household affairs that was considered just as important as any business venture. The boot spoke to the working man, to those who earned their living through physical labor and took pride in their craftsmanship. The thimble honored the seamstresses and tailors, the patient artisans who created beauty through careful stitching. The battleship reminded players of America's growing military might, while the race car captured the excitement of speed and competition that was beginning to define American leisure. The dog was just pure joy, the kind of faithful companion that makes any journey more pleasant. And the wheelbarrow represented honest work, the satisfaction of building something with your own 2 hands. Over the decades, these tokens have become more than just game pieces. They've become characters in their own right, each one carrying the personalities we've assigned to them. The top hat player is sophisticated, calculating, always dressed for success. The dog is loyal and friendly, the kind of player who might make deals based on friendship rather than pure profit. The race car is aggressive, always looking for the fastest way around the board. Families develop their own token traditions. Perhaps Dad always plays the top hat, maintaining his dignity even when mortgaging properties to pay rent. Maybe little sister claims the dog and somehow always seems to land on the good spaces. The iron might be everyone's least favorite, relegated to the player who arrives last at the table. In the 1990s, Monopoly began experimenting with new tokens, adding the moneybag in some editions, then retiring others. The iron, faithful servant of domestic life, was voted off the board in 2013, replaced by a cat that represented our evolving relationship with pets as family members rather than working animals. The most recent addition has been the T-Rex, a choice that would have baffled Charles Darrow, but perfectly captures our modern fascination with dinosaurs, with ancient power, with the idea that even the mightiest can be brought low by changing circumstances. There's something delightfully absurd about a Tyrannosaurus Rex carefully counting out rent money. And that absurdity is part of Monopoly's enduring charm. But tokens aren't the only characters in our Monopoly story. Every edition of the game has featured its own cast of illustrated personalities, on the chance and community chest cards. These unnamed figures, the policeman directing traffic, the banker counting money, the society lady stepping out of her limousine, create a visual narrative of 1930s American life. The art style of these cards has remained remarkably consistent over the decades, a testament to the timeless appeal of that Art Deco aesthetic that defined the era when Monopoly was born. The men wear fedoras and suits, the women sport elegant dresses and carefully waved hair, and everyone seems to inhabit a world where prosperity and progress march hand in hand. These illustrations create a sense of place and time that transcends the simple mechanics of the game. They suggest stories. Who is that man hurrying past the hotel? What's the story behind the bank error in your favor, windfall? The cards don't tell us, leaving room for our imaginations to fill in the details. The unwritten rules of home. Now, as we settle deeper into our story, we come to perhaps the most important chapter of all, the one that's never been written in any official rulebook, but exists in the hearts and memories of families everywhere. These are the house rules, the gentle modifications and cherished traditions that transform a simple board game into a family institution. The most beloved of these unofficial rules concerns that corner space we visited earlier, free parking. According to Parker Brothers, landing on free parking should be, well, nothing special. It's just a rest stop, a moment to pause without consequence. But families had other ideas. Somewhere in the collective imagination of Monopoly players, free parking became the lottery space, the place where all the tax money and penalty payments accumulate until one lucky player lands there and claims the jackpot. The pot starts with the luxury tax from the corner space, $75 in the classic edition, and grows with every payment to the bank for various infractions and fees. Picture a typical family game on a Sunday afternoon. The free parking pot has been growing all game long. $75 from luxury tax, $200 from passing GO and landing on the income tax space, $50 from a chance card penalty. Little Bobby, who's been struggling with just the orange properties and a mortgaged railroad, rolls the dice and counts out his spaces with the careful precision of someone who's learned that in Monopoly, every move matters. 7, 8, 9, free parking. The family erupts in cheers as Bobby scoops up $325 and suddenly has enough money to unmortgage his properties and maybe, just maybe, buy a few houses. This transformation of free parking isn't just a rule change, it's a statement of values. Families who play with the free parking jackpot are saying that games should have moments of unexpected joy, that even when you're losing, hope should remain alive. It's a small rebellion against the harsh mathematics of pure capitalism, a way of ensuring that no one stays down for too long. Another cherished house rule concerns the auctions that are supposed to happen when a player lands on a property, but chooses not to buy it. The official rules state that the property must then be auctioned to the highest bidder, but many families simply ignore this rule entirely. Why? Because auctions speed up the game, and speeding up Monopoly runs counter to its essential nature as an evening's entertainment, a leisurely journey through the world of property ownership. Families want their Monopoly games to last. They want time for negotiations, for alliances to form and dissolve, for the slow drama of economic development to unfold. The auction rule, while mathematically sound, interferes with this gentle pacing. So it's quietly abandoned, like a recipe modification that makes a favorite dish taste more like home. Then there are the trading traditions, the unwritten etiquette of property negotiation that varies from family to family, but follows certain universal principles. There's the immunity deal. I won't charge you rent on my properties for the next 3 turns if you don't charge me for landing on yours. There's the future consideration. I'll give you cent. James Place now if you promise to give me the next railroad you buy. Some families develop elaborate trading ceremonies, complete with handshakes and formal announcements. Others conduct their negotiations in whispers, secret deals made while other players are distracted. Children learn the art of persuasion through monopoly trades, discovering how to frame offers in ways that seem beneficial to both parties, how to time their proposals for maximum effect, how to sweeten deals with small concessions that cost little but mean much. The role of the banker varies enormously from family to family as well. In some households, the banker is a position of trust and authority, usually held by a parent or the most mathematically inclined player. They handle all transactions with serious efficiency, maintaining the integrity of the game's financial system. In other families, everyone banks for themselves, leading to a more chaotic but arguably more democratic system where each player takes responsibility for their own financial management. Some families institute loan systems between players, allowing private borrowing with negotiated interest rates. Others maintain strict bank-only lending policies. Some allow players to pay debts with property transfers. Others insist on cash-only transactions. Each variation creates a slightly different game, a unique family ecosystem of economic rules and relationships. The endgame traditions are perhaps the most varied of all. The official rules state that the game ends when all but one player have been bankrupted, but this creates problems for family game night. A true Monopoly game played to completion can take 4 or 5 hours, and watching family members get eliminated one by one doesn't make for the most pleasant evening entertainment. So families create their own ending conditions. Some play for a set time limit, 2 hours, 3 hours, and count up total assets at the end. Others play until a predetermined wealth threshold is reached. Some families institute a mercy rule. When one player clearly has an insurmountable lead, the game ends with gracious congratulations all around. These house rules aren't bugs in the Monopoly system, they're features. They represent the beautiful way that families adapt games to serve their own needs, their own values, their own definitions of fun. They turn a commercial product into a family tradition, a shared language of play that gets passed down from generation to generation. Around the world in 80 boards. Our gentle journey now takes us beyond the familiar streets of Atlantic City, beyond the comfortable borders of the original American board, to explore how Monopoly has made itself at home in countries and cultures around the world. It's a story of adaptation and translation, of how a game born from one city's geography has managed to capture the dreams and aspirations of people everywhere. The first international edition appeared in 1936, just 1 year after Parker Brothers began mass-producing the American version. But this wasn't just a matter of translating the rules into different languages. It required reimagining the entire world of the game for different audiences. London was the natural choice for the first international edition. After all, Britain and America shared language and many cultural touchstones. But London's property structure was different from Atlantic City's democratic grid of numbered streets and named avenues. London had centuries of history embedded in its geography, royal connections and ancient boundaries that carried meaning far beyond simple real estate values. The London Board, first published by Waddington's, transformed Monopoly's property ladder into a tour of British social geography. The Brown properties became Old Kent Road and Whitechapel Road areas associated with working-class London, the kinds of neighborhoods where Charles Dickens had set his stories of struggle and perseverance. The light blue properties became the Angel Islington, Euston Road, and Pentonville Road, solid middle-class areas where respectable families made their homes. As the property values climbed, so did the social status of the neighborhoods. The orange properties included Bow Street, home to the famous Magistrates' Court, Marlborough Street, and Vine Street. The red properties featured the Strand, Fleet Street heart of London's newspaper industry. and Trafalgar Square locations that every Londoner would recognize as part of the city's beating heart. The yellow properties brought players into the realm of serious wealth. Leicester Square, center of London's theatre district, Coventry Street, and Piccadilly, the fashionable shopping street. And finally, the crown jewels, Park Lane and Mayfair, addresses that whispered of old money, titled families, and the kind of wealth that had been accumulating for generations. The railroads became London's great railway terminals: King's Cross, Marylebone, Fenchurch Street, and Liverpool Street, each one a gateway to different parts of Britain and the empire beyond. These weren't just transportation hubs. They were symbols of Britain's industrial might and commercial reach. This careful adaptation of monopoly to British sensibilities set the pattern for international additions. The game worked best when it reflected local geography and local dreams of prosperity. Players needed to recognize the places on the board, to understand intuitively which properties were humble and which were prestigious. Paris got its own edition, featuring the Champs-Élysées as the equivalent of boardwalk, with the Place de la Concorde and other iconic locations marking the progression from modest beginnings to grand success. German editions featured streets from major German cities, while Italian versions celebrated the beauty of Rome, Milan, and Venice. But perhaps the most interesting adaptations occurred in countries where local real estate markets worked differently from the American model. In some cultures, the idea of individual property ownership was less central to economic life. In others, the most valuable real estate wasn't commercial property, but agricultural land or industrial facilities. These cultural differences led to fascinating variations in gameplay and property selection. Some editions featured different types of properties, entirely factories instead of hotels, agricultural estates instead of residential neighborhoods. Others maintained the basic property structure, but chose locations that reflected local values and aspirations. The most expensive Monopoly sets ever created take this customization to extraordinary levels. The jeweler Sidney Mobile created a version in 1988 where the board was made from 18-karat gold, the dice were studded with diamonds, and the playing pieces were carved from precious gems. The set was valued at over $2 million and included rubies for the hotels and sapphires for the houses. More recently, artist Sidney Mobile's nephew commissioned an even more elaborate version featuring a solid gold board, diamond-encrusted dice, and playing pieces carved from single pieces of precious stone. These aren't games meant to be played, they're art pieces. Statements about luxury and value that transform a humble board game into a museum exhibit. But even at more accessible price points, international Monopoly editions have become collectibles in their own right. The differences in artwork, property selection, and cultural adaptation make each edition a snapshot of a particular place and time. Collectors seek out rare editions from small countries, special commemorative versions, and limited releases that capture historical moments. The Tokyo edition, for instance, includes the famous Ginza district as its most expensive property, reflecting Japan's post-war economic miracle and the astronomical real estate values of 1980s Tokyo. The Hong Kong edition, published during the British colonial period, included both English and Chinese property names, reflecting the city's unique cultural position. Some of the most poignant editions come from countries that no longer exist. East German Monopoly sets, published during the brief period after the Berlin Wall fell, but before reunification, capture a moment when socialist countries were experimenting with capitalist ideas. These sets often feature properties from both East and West, representing dreams of a reunited nation. The Soviet Union, despite its official rejection of capitalist principles, eventually published its own Monopoly variant called Manager, where players competed to build the most successful businesses in a market economy. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. a country that had spent decades denouncing property ownership and private enterprise, was now teaching its children the rules of capitalism through board games. Modern international editions continue this tradition of cultural adaptation. The Mumbai edition reflects India's growing economic power, while the Dubai edition captures the ambitious urban development of the United Arab Emirates. Each edition tells a story about local dreams and global aspirations, about how the simple mechanics of property ownership and economic development translate across cultures and continents. The psychology of play. As our bedtime story winds deeper into the night, let's explore the quieter mysteries of Monopoly. The way it affects our hearts and minds, the emotions it stirs, and the lessons it teaches us about ourselves and each other. There's something almost mystical about the way Monopoly transforms ordinary family members into property tycoons, careful negotiators, and sometimes ruthless competitors. The transformation begins the moment the tokens are chosen and the first dice are rolled. Suddenly, Mom isn't just Mom, she's the owner of the Reading Railroad and a shrewd investor eyeing the orange properties. Dad becomes a real estate mogul, with a portfolio of green properties and dreams of monopoly domination. This transformation speaks to something deep in human nature, our need to play roles, to experiment with different versions of ourselves in safe spaces. Around the Monopoly board, children learn to make deals with adults on equal terms. Shy family members discover their inner negotiators. Conservative investors experiment with bold strategies they'd never consider in real life. The psychology of property attachment in Monopoly is particularly fascinating. Players develop emotional connections to their properties that go far beyond their mathematical value. Someone might refuse to trade away Mediterranean Avenue even when offered a much better deal, simply because it was their first property, their humble beginning in the world of real estate ownership. This attachment isn't irrational, it's deeply human. We invest our properties with stories, with memories of how we acquired them and what they represent. The orange properties might remind us of the bold move we made early in the game, mortgaging everything to complete the set. The railroads might represent steady, reliable income during a difficult period, when other players were demanding high rents. The negotiation psychology in Monopoly is equally complex. Successful players learn to read not just the mathematical possibilities of trades, but the emotional states of their opponents. They recognize when someone is feeling desperate and might accept a bad deal, or when a player is feeling confident and might drive a hard bargain. Children playing Monopoly often reveal personality traits that might otherwise remain hidden. The careful child who always saves their allowance becomes the conservative player who maintains large cash reserves and avoids risky investments. The impulsive child who spends their money as soon as they get it might make bold property purchases that either lead to spectacular success or dramatic failure. The social dynamics of Monopoly games create fascinating microcosms of economic behavior. Alliances form and dissolve based on immediate needs and long-term strategies. Players who are losing often band together against the leader, creating temporary partnerships that mirror real-world economic coalitions. The player in the lead learns what it feels like to be the target of everyone else's frustration, while those behind discover the complex emotions of resentment, hope, and determination. One of the most psychologically interesting aspects of Monopoly is how it handles luck versus skill. The dice create random movement around the board, ensuring that no strategy can guarantee success. But within that framework of chance, players make dozens of decisions that can dramatically affect their outcomes. When to buy properties, when to trade, when to build houses, when to mortgage assets, these choices matter enormously. This balance between chance and choice creates what psychologists call partial reinforcement, a situation where success comes unpredictably, making the activity more engaging and potentially addictive than if outcomes were entirely predictable. It's the same principle that makes slot machines compelling, the possibility that the next spin, the next roll of the dice, might change everything. The emotional roller coaster of Monopoly is part of its enduring appeal. The joy of landing on free parking with a large jackpot waiting. The sinking feeling of rolling the dice and watching your token land on a developed property owned by someone else. The excitement of completing a color group and being able to build houses. The desperation of scrambling to raise money when you're facing bankruptcy. These emotions are heightened by the game's length. A typical family Monopoly game might last 2 to 4 hours, enough time for multiple reversals of fortune, for hope to die and be reborn, for relationships around the table to shift and evolve. Players who start the game as allies might end as adversaries. The child who seemed hopelessly behind might suddenly acquire a game-changing Monopoly. The teaching aspects of Monopoly are subtle but profound. Children learn about money management, about the relationship between risk and reward, about the power of compound growth when rent payments accumulate. They discover that sometimes the best strategy is patience, holding cash and waiting for opportunities, while other times bold action is required. More importantly, perhaps, they learn about negotiation and compromise. Monopoly trades rarely involve simple exchanges of equal value. Instead, they require creativity, persuasion, and the ability to see situations from multiple perspectives. A successful trade benefits both parties, but not necessarily in obvious ways. One player might get immediate cash flow, while another gets long-term strategic position. The game also teaches lessons about economic inequality that Elizabeth Meiji would have recognized. As the game progresses, wealth tends to concentrate among fewer and fewer players. The rich get richer not just through good luck, but because having money makes it easier to make more money. The player with a monopoly can afford to be patient, can survive bad luck, can make strategic investments that players living hand-to-mouth cannot consider. Yet Monopoly also demonstrates the fragility of economic position. Fortunes can be lost as quickly as they're made. The player who seems unstoppable might land on the wrong property at the wrong time and find themselves scrambling to stay solvent. This volatility keeps the game interesting, but it also reflects real-world economic realities in ways that pure skill-based games cannot. Curious collections and records. As we near the end of our gentle journey through the world of Monopoly, let's explore some of the more curious corners of its universe. The records, the collections, the obsessions that demonstrate just how deeply this simple board game has embedded itself in human culture. The longest Monopoly game ever played is the stuff of legend. In 1982, a group of players in Scranton, Pennsylvania, began a game that would last 70 straight days. 70 days. Picture that commitment, players taking shifts, sleeping in rotation, maintaining the game around the clock for over 2 months. The game became a local phenomenon, with spectators dropping by to watch the marathon session and local newspapers providing daily updates on property developments and player standings. But why would anyone play Monopoly for 70 days? The answer speaks to something deeper than mere endurance. For these players, the game had become a meditation on persistence, strategy, and community. They had created their own temporary society with its own economy, its own social dynamics, its own evolving history. Each day brought new negotiations, new alliances, new reversals of fortune that kept the experience fresh despite the repetition. At the other extreme, the shortest recorded Monopoly game lasted just 21 seconds. This remarkable feat required careful setup and a very specific sequence of dice rolls, but it demonstrates that even within Monopoly's structure, extraordinary outcomes are possible. The player who achieved this record moved around the board with supernatural efficiency. landing on and purchasing key properties with mechanical precision that would have made Charles Darrow proud. The mathematics of monopoly have fascinated researchers for decades. Computer simulations have determined that the orange properties, St. James Place, Tennessee Avenue, and New York Avenue, are landed on more frequently than any others. This isn't coincidence. It's the result of careful analysis of dice probabilities, chance and community chest card effects, and the strategic importance of the jail corner. St. James Place, in particular, holds the distinction of being the most landed-on property in the game. 7 spaces from jail, the most common distance traveled on 2 dice, it catches players who are just visiting and those who have been released. It benefits from the Go to St. James Place card in the community chess deck, and its position makes it a natural stopping point for players circling the board. This frequency analysis has led to sophisticated monopoly strategies that treat property ownership as a mathematical optimization problem. Advanced players calculate expected returns on investment for different property groups, factor in building costs and rent schedules, and make decisions based on probability matrices that would impress a Wall Street analyst. But perhaps more interesting than the mathematical approach is the collecting culture that has grown up around Monopoly. There are people who own hundreds of different editions, seeking out rare versions from obscure countries, limited editions created for special events, and promotional versions created for movies, television shows, and corporate partnerships. Some collectors focus on vintage sets, hunting for early Parker Brothers editions with wooden houses and hotels, hand-cut property cards, and artwork that captures the aesthetic of the 1930s and 1940s. These early sets have a craftsmanship quality that mass-produced modern versions lack. The money feels different, the board has weight and substance. The tokens have a satisfying heft that speaks to an era when manufacturing was still partly an art form. Others collect thematic editions, the hundreds of licensed versions that have transformed Monopoly's basic structure into explorations of popular culture. There's Disney Monopoly, Star Wars Monopoly, The Simpsons Monopoly, and versions based on countless other franchises. Each one represents an attempt to capture the appeal of a particular fictional universe within Monopoly's familiar framework. The most valuable collectible Monopoly sets aren't necessarily the oldest ones. Rarity and condition matter more than age. A complete, mint condition set from a small country's limited print run might be worth more than a well-worn original American edition. Collectors prize sets with all original components, undamaged boxes, and clear, unfaded artwork. Celebrity Monopoly stories add another layer to the game's cultural significance. During the filming of The Shining, the cast and crew reportedly played marathon Monopoly games during the long, isolated months of shooting. The games became a way to bond, to pass time, and to maintain sanity during what was often a tense and demanding production process. Warren Buffett, one of the world's most successful investors, has spoken about learning business principles from childhood Monopoly games. The simple lessons of the game: buy good properties, generate steady cash flow, reinvest profits, wisely mirror the strategies that made him one of the wealthiest people in the world. The competitive Monopoly scene is smaller, but no less passionate than other board game communities. The World Monopoly Championship, held every few years, brings together national champions from around the globe to compete for the title of world's best Monopoly player. These tournaments use official rules with no house variations, timed rounds, and standardized equipment to ensure fair competition. Tournament Monopoly is a different game from family Monopoly. Players are rigorously trained in probability calculations, optimal trading strategies, and psychological manipulation techniques. They study opening game sequences like chess players study chess openings. They practice speed play to maximize their effectiveness within time limits. Yet even at this elite level, Monopoly retains its essential character as a game where fortune can shift in an instant. The best strategy in the world cannot overcome a series of unlucky dice rolls, and the most carefully planned approach can be derailed by an opponent's unexpected move. The modern empire. As our bedtime story draws toward its close, let's consider how Monopoly has adapted to our modern world, how it continues to evolve while maintaining its essential character as a game about property, ambition, and the American dream. The digital age has transformed Monopoly in ways that Charles Darrow could never have imagined. Video game versions allow players to compete against sophisticated artificial intelligence or against opponents on the other side of the world. Online Monopoly tournaments bring together players from different continents, creating communities of competition that transcend geographical boundaries. Mobile versions of the game have introduced Monopoly to new generations who might never have encountered the physical board. These digital adaptations often include features impossible in the analog version: animated tokens that dance across the board, sound effects that bring properties to life, and automatic calculation of complex transactions that keep the game moving smoothly. Yet something is lost in the translation to digital formats. The physical ritual of rolling dice, moving tokens by hand, and handling paper money creates a tactile connection to the game that screens cannot replicate. The face-to-face negotiation across a kitchen table involves subtle cues of body language and voice tone that video chat cannot fully capture. Perhaps recognizing this, Hasbro has continued to innovate with physical versions of the game. Electronic banking editions replace paper money with credit cards and digital transactions. Voice-activated versions allow players to conduct business with spoken commands. Themed editions continue to proliferate, adapting Monopoly's structure to explore everything from popular television shows to historical periods. The most significant recent innovation has been Monopoly Cheaters Edition, which officially acknowledges and incorporates the creative rule-breaking that has always been part of family Monopoly games. This version includes specific cheating challenges and rewards players for successfully breaking rules without getting caught. It's a brilliant recognition of how families actually play Monopoly, turning bugs into features and celebrating the human tendency to bend rules in service of fun. Educational versions have brought Monopoly into classrooms around the world. Teachers use the game to teach lessons about economics, mathematics, geography, and social studies. Students learn about supply and demand, about compound interest, about the role of luck versus skill in economic success. The game provides a safe space to experiment with financial concepts without real-world consequences. These educational applications have revealed new depths in Monopoly's design. What seemed like simple property trading becomes a lesson in resource allocation. What appeared to be straightforward money management becomes an exploration of risk assessment and strategic planning. The game's ability to generate discussion about fairness, competition, and economic justice makes it a valuable tool for exploring complex social issues. The therapeutic applications of Monopoly have also been recognized by psychologists and social workers. Family therapy sessions sometimes include board games as a way to observe family dynamics in a structured but relaxed setting. The way families negotiate Monopoly trades can reveal patterns of communication, power distribution, and conflict resolution that might not emerge in traditional therapy conversations. Monopoly has also found its way into business training programs, where it serves as a simplified model for understanding market dynamics, negotiation strategies, and competitive behavior. MBA students might play modified versions of the game to explore concepts like market consolidation, pricing strategies, and the effects of regulation on competitive markets. The cultural impact of Monopoly extends far beyond gaming. The phrase, "do not pass go," "do not collect $200" has entered common usage as a way to describe situations where normal benefits are denied. Monopoly money has become shorthand for worthless currency or unrealistic financial figures. The top hat, race car, and other tokens have become cultural icons recognizable even to people who rarely play board games. As we reach the end of our bedtime story, picture families around the world tonight gathered around their own Monopoly boards. Children learning to count and negotiate. Parents rediscovering the joy of play. Grandparents sharing wisdom gained through decades of property development and strategic thinking. The boxes of these games hold more than boards and tokens and money. They hold traditions, memories, and possibilities. They hold the promise that tomorrow night or next weekend or whenever the family gathers again, the board can be unfolded, the tokens can be chosen, and the ancient dance of property and prosperity can begin anew. In a world that often feels uncertain and complex, Monopoly offers the comfort of familiar rules, predictable patterns, and outcomes that matter without mattering too much. Win or lose, bankruptcy or triumph, the game ends with pieces returning to their box, ready for the next adventure around the board. Sweet dreams, and may your next trip around the board bring you fortune, joy, and just the right amount of good luck to keep the game interesting.